I want to preface this review, and it should be obvious that I'm not holding any personal grudges against Konami or the business side of the Metal Gear series recently. I've heard and read the general bubble of screw Konami and this game is probably going to suck even though I've never played it before comments and videos recently. Obviously this review is done once I've played the game, not my first impressions of the beta from weeks ago, or my opinion on the game based on what Konami did to Kojima recently. Anyway, here's my review. Metal Gear Survive is the newest entry and a spin-off title for the Metal Gear series. Unlike previous Metal Gear titles that focus on stealth and politically story-driven experiences, Survival feels more like an arcade-centric game under the Metal Gear license, using the same Fox engine. While I don't mind that the series is exploring new genres, I only really enjoy the new experiences if they're done well. Metal Gear Rising is a great example of that. Let's see how Survive stacks up, if it's truly a great spin-off or a cash grab attempt by Konami. Metal Gear Survive takes place somewhere between the events of Metal Gear Ground Zeroes and Metal Gear The Phantom Pain. Specifically, Survive takes place during the big attack on Mother Base, but now from the perspective of the soldiers on the base and the aftermath of all the destruction. Upon Big Boss escaping Mother Base, a giant wormhole opens up over the remains of the base and sucks up pretty much any of the soldiers that were left behind. One soldier, the person you play as, gets sucked into the wormhole as well, but escapes at the cost of his arm. The soldier passes out and doesn't wake up for another 6 months, where he gets a new mission from a man working for the US government, and he goes by the name Good Luck. Your mission is to travel to this parallel world that sucked up Mother Base and your fellow soldiers, and retrieve a cure for the infection that you seem to now have as well. Here's the twist though. The fellow soldiers you've come to save are infected by this weird life form that's killing them and reanimating the corpses of the soldiers into zombie-like creatures. These zombies are called Wanderers and come with red crystals coming out of their heads. It's surely a bizarre setup for a Metal Gear game, but the series hasn't always been super set in non-fiction anyway, so I don't really want to knock it for going out there too. The setup is pretty interesting. I like that despite being a pretty segregated idea from the rest of the series, it's incorporated into the established scenes from the series already. It sort of reminds me of something that was recently done in the story for Kingdom Hearts 0.2, A Fragmentary Passage, for those of you that played that game. With that said, despite having an interesting setup, the characters feel rather flat. Our playable character doesn't really show a lot of depth in personality or character. He's a soldier that follows orders but doesn't really have a lot of background info, so during the playthrough he can pretty much be any generic soldier. The ongoing contact with Lucky offers even less character development, as his main interaction with you is telling you where to go and narrating a mission. He might as well just be an AI voice, and ironically he does get replaced by one pretty early on in the game. All of this is packaged together into a game whose story has a very slow start that doesn't necessarily build up to anything. It just sort of slows down the time it takes to get into the meat of the gameplay. Metal Gear Survive takes quite a bit to get into the gameplay. It features a pretty slow start that doesn't really let you start playing the game until 20 minutes in. Once you're in this parallel dimension, the gameplay kicks in and it truly does take on the whole survive part pretty seriously. You can think of Metal Gear Survive as a tower defense survival game. Throughout the game you'll have to manage your hunger, thirst, and on occasion your oxygen levels. Now while I may not confirm it in the game, I have every reason to believe that there's a tapeworm inside of our main character because the rate he constantly needs to eat and drink is absurd. I mean, this review in perspective is coming from a previously really fat guy. Every few minutes my character was dying for some water or food. Scattered throughout the open world are small ponds and wildlife that you can hunt down and gather to replenish your health stats. Taking these food sources back to your camp lets you cook the meat you've hunted or filter out the dirty water you've gathered. Usually the game is pretty good about providing a good amount of animals and resources, so you're never lost searching for food. So long as you mark where you found animals on your map, you can pretty much easily look it up on your map and go hunting. The one problem I did run into on occasion though was having animals take a while to respawn, leaving me out to die if I didn't find a new herd of animals I hadn't already marked on my map. Hunting these animals can get rather annoying too. You have to play this game really slowly because if you try to charge at an enemy and aim, well, it just doesn't end up working too well. Usually I ended up missing the target and then it would flank me as I turned around. In general, trying to be quick while fighting feels clunky and rather terrible in the game. The combat makes sense for the slower paced wanderers or zombies, but when you have to attack a fast pack of wolves then it's more of a pain. Speaking of the wanderers, they come in different shapes and sizes with their own unique quirks that change up the approach of attack on them. Each one has a special crystal inside them called a curb crystal that you can collect to level up your character's stats and in return unlock new skills. This process of leveling up is pretty easy and straightforward, though if you want to take the cheap way out, or I guess rather the expensive way, you can purchase microtransactions that boost up your earning rates. Think about it like being able to buy a double XP weekend pack but for Metal Gear. They're not that intrusive or up in your face in the single player, they're sort of just tucked away in a menu. However, they're still there in the end and a reminder of the shady business practice that's being forced into many games recently. Now back to the topic of health statuses such as hunger. The dramatically quickly draining health status kept the game feeling challenging, but it definitely bordered the line of annoyance and frustration way too easily. I don't mind having to hunt for food, it seems logical in a survival game, but it seems pretty stupid to constantly need to eat something every 4 to 6 minutes. There were times where I was just trying to take back loot to my base but ended up dying because I starved in my base. I respawn in my base. That brings me to another chunk of the game, the crafting and tower defense aspects. Your main base is where you have to return all your resources you've gathered out in the wild. Here you can craft new weapons, gear like fences and barricades to hold off wanderers, and basically just build up your base. The other half of the tower defense like gameplay comes from the missions you go on. A good chunk of the missions in Metal Gear Survive have you activating wormhole generators that let you travel from one part of the map to another. Activating these can be a bit tough as they attract a lot of attention, and it ends up being a game of defend this machine for 3 minutes while zombies attack. It was fun at first, crafting up borders and taking down Wanderer one by one, but it got rather repetitive pretty quickly. Sure, the layout and setting of these missions change up as the map opens up with every wormhole that's created, but ultimately the gameplay felt repetitive. My personal favorite missions were the ones that felt a bit more stealth focused, infiltrating areas that hid an item in them where they were covered in wanderers. Usually this meant trying to sneak my way through a large base filled with zombies that could easily mob me in an instant. Sometimes that would turn into a game of tower defense as I set up walls to help me survive. Another big aspect of the single player campaign is the dust. It's this giant dust storm cloud that takes up parts of the map and it strips you of your sense of location. Here you'll usually find a bunch of resources to take back to your base, but at the cost of being lost while exploring the area and having to manage the oxygen tank on top of your traditional health statuses. Oxygen is replenished by the use of crystals. Usually the dust storm is smothered in wanderers and crystals, so it's not that hard of a status to keep in check. Now Metal Gear Survive has this always online connection requirement, even when you're just playing by yourself. It does also feature a multiplayer wave survival mode though. Here you can partner up with 3 other players as you fight waves of wanderers. It's basically the wormhole generator single player mission turned into a multiplayer session. It's a bit more fun to play with other players but becomes incredibly difficult if you're low level. The easiest difficulty at the moment has wanderers at level 20, and unless you're leveled up for the game you're going to get completely bodied. There's some rebalancing of difficulty that needs to be done here because the way the game is set up at the moment, it's pretty much impossible to start the multiplayer unless you've leveled up high enough in the single player. I think blocking it off until you've leveled up to a certain point or just making a much easier difficulty is a smarter idea than just letting a level 1 player jump into a level 20 match. Ultimately, Metal Gear Survive's gameplay felt fun in some minor aspects but rather repetitive and unimpressive in most others. I really got a kick out of the missions that had me sneaking my way past wanderers in giant herds. That felt like it changed up the series while still feeling like it fit in place. But there were plenty of ideas that seemed half-baked, like they had potential but just weren't executed properly. The hunger and general health status meters being the best example of that. On the other hand, going into dust parts of the map that completely stripped you away of your sense of location and map felt fun and adventurous. It sort of gave me that excitement that I get when ditching my established home and explore the wild in a game of Minecraft hardcore survival. Metal Gear Survive is a moderately good looking game. All of those cinematic cutscenes that the series is known for are still here with a good use of framing and composition. The same can be said for the visuals during the gameplay though. During my playthrough, I noticed a handful of shadow glitches that would improperly render at different resolution. Usually in game design this is meant to be in sync with how far you see the shadow. If it's far, it'll be blurry, and if you get closer, it becomes sharper. That wasn't really the case in this game though. It seemed pretty random in what resolution they'd render in, and it definitely took me out of the game immersion at times. The biggest issue I had with the visuals though were the intentional health status effects that would blur out the gameplay and have this sort of vertigo effect over everything. I wouldn't have minded this as much if the game didn't make my character starve to death every 4 minutes. Because of this, I spent a lot of the first game with blurred vision. It made me nauseous and made me want to stop playing the game pretty early on. As for performance, I played mostly on Xbox One X, and it being an enhanced title, it runs at 1440p 60 frames per second, though it does occasionally dip into the mid-50s. On the PS4 Pro, the game runs at a smoother 60 FPS but at a lower resolution at what looks like 1080p. On base hardware like the PS4, the game runs at the near 1080p with a much more unstable frame rate that ranges from mid-40s to high 50s. The original Xbox One offers the worst experience at a resolution of 720p with a frame rate that tends to hover mostly in the 40s to the mid-50s. Xbox One X, PS4 Pro, and PC are definitely the way to go for this title, not just for the best performance, but for a playable one. You'll be happy to hear that a lot of the classic Metal Gear sounds are still here despite the game being a different genre. That was the peak of it to me though, because as I mentioned earlier, the cast of characters felt rather boring to me, and the performances of the actors sort of just meshed into the background. The same can be said about the music that just really got drowned out and forgotten about. Metal Gear Survive is a half-baked game, and I mean it in every sense of the phrase. There's parts of the gameplay here that are genuinely fun, like the entire survival aspect and the infiltrating of areas scattered with zombies. They aren't cooked up to their full potential though. There needs to be a bit more leeway with the hunger meters, and the visual blur needs to be tweaked a bit if those meters aren't going to change. That general visual effect made it sickening to play this game, literally. Things like the multiplayer, oddly enough, feel like they should have some restrictions or a level requirement, at least if they're going to force you to play against level 20 enemies that'll one-shot you if you aren't ranked up. The story setup seemed interesting. I liked that it fit into the already established series, but it never really lived up to the setup the game was going for. In the end, Metal Gear Survive is a game with a pretty big vision that just doesn't really deliver on it. That does it for my review of Metal Gear Survive for the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. If you have any questions about the game or future review requests, please leave them in the comments down below. You can also reach me over on Twitter, Instagram, or my Discord, which are all linked in the description down below. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one.